the let me just make sure the stream's running, and then as soon as it comes up online, I will switch over. Team contract, and then also the analytical assignment, conceptual assignment, which will be coming up soon. So that is all happening in the near future. Just checking the stream. Looks like it's live. Okay, should be good here. Sorry, pause. Yeah, it looks like it is. Okay, good. Got it. Okay. I always like to make sure that I'm not recording to thin air for like an hour. Major things to work on this week is the project introduction team contract. That's your number one thing to get in. That's due Wednesday night, February the 5th at 11:55 p.m. You also need to start working on the individual conceptual assignment, which will become available that morning on February 5th. It's not due to February 12th. And as always, there are, in the 2 weeks when we have these individual assignments, I'm not going to assign a reading, so you have no reading for this week. But please work on the individual assignment. It will be similar in flavor to a lot of the reading assignments we've had. So you'll have a short reading, and then you'll have to answer a series of questions about it. Usually it's about, I haven't finished putting the touches on it. I have the ideas, but don't have it done completely. 4 to 5 questions, a half page per question, so no more than 2.5 pages, kind of what I'm looking at. Take home, obviously, open notes, open books, open internet, right? And so feel free to fill it out as best as possible. But, the big thing to remember is don't give me the first thing that pops in your head. Give me the best thing that comes to mind, okay? Then in addition to that, I also want you to do the week 5 videos. So this is on analytics and optimization, which is good because our second individual assignment will have to do with in analytics. And then, of course, if you want to read chapters 3 and chapters 20 and 21, those are kind of the related chapters that we'll be talking about this week. So that's the major what to do. Now, as I'm presenting, if anyone has any questions, please pop them up. Just a short reminder again that there's a delay between when I start recording and when I see any questions. So you want to make sure that those show up early on so I can address them. Okay. So let's see. The other things to talk about this week are I want to talk about the Facebook follower, and I also want to talk a little bit about the Super Bowl, just because it just happened. So. It obviously has a lot to do with marketing and digital marketing and everything like that. So I always like to mention it briefly during this time of the year. Okay. By the way, so let's start off with a couple more notes about the contract and intro. I had a couple of questions that came up during emails that I want to respond to. One is there was some question about people worrying that a firm expressing that they might not have a lot of time. That's fine. I would love it if you met with them once, at the beginning, once in the middle, and once at the end, and had some sort of like almost weekly contact with them throughout. But I understand most firms can't afford that amount of time to spend with you. So whatever time they can give you is fine. We can work around it. I've had teams whose firms just stopped talking to them halfway through the semester, and they still did a great job for the project. So don't worry about it too much when it comes to that. Another quick note is that several people asked, do you need to turn in multiple assignments, or will just one do per team? And the answer is just one per team. The way it works in Moodle is that we'll grade that one, and it should automatically reflect the scores back for every group member. If it doesn't for some reason, let me know. I think I fixed everything, so it should do that automatically. Okay, it's the only comment I have. Oh, the contract. Take a look at the contract. It's very simple. I want you to do this for yourselves, so fill it out to the best of your own ability, right? And we're not going to grade it. We're just going to check to see if it was done or not, right? So as long as you turn in and it looks like you made an effort at getting agreement on it, that's all that really matters. The real goal of the contract is so that at the end of the semester, when we go to fill out the peer assignments, there's no arguing over, well, I never agreed to do that, or I never agreed to do that, right? You'll have the contract right there, so you can talk that. Okay. So that's everything I want to talk about for the assignments. Hopefully that helps. The next thing I'm going to talk about briefly before we move on to the follower factory reading is the Super Bowl, right? Or as one interesting social media campaign called it, the Day of Superb Owls, right? Which is kind of a play on Super Bowl, right? So this was actually mentioned to me by Michelle Muir. I'd heard it a couple of times recently, actually. Apparently there's been this trend in recent years of actually tweeting pictures of owls during the Super Bowl, right? And there's two reasons. One, it's just kind of funny, right? There's an entire subreddit, by the way, devoted to it. But another reason is that it's a way to get around the copyright of Super Bowl. So Super Bowl, the term itself is copyrighted, so you can't use it unless you're somehow involved with the Super Bowl. And so they've been kind of people have used Superb Owl as a way to talk about the Super Bowl without actually talking about the Super Bowl. And so one brand took this to the extreme, and they've since taken the tweets down. I don't know if it was because of they really worked against some issues, or if it was just because it was just supposed to be a short-lived campaign, and they weren't really going to talk about it too much, right? But there are a couple of them still up, so I wanted to kind of show off for you. So let me pull this up. So let me capture that. Show me Twitter. Yep. Okay. There we go. That should work. Okay. So here you go. Here is the Honda Pilot. All right. Ad campaign. And as you can see, the text says, "Little in stature, not in fight. Meet the very strong, very little superb little owl." Right. And it's somehow an ad for the Honda Pilot that it's strong but small, right? I think the Pilot is actually a fairly big car myself, but nonetheless, that's kind of the way the campaign went. And almost all of them were pictures of owls again, but somehow tied in specifically to the car, right? Not sure that I really see the relevance there, but I thought it was kind of interesting, right? Anyways, and I thought this was nice because it's a social media campaign. It's obviously directly related to what we're talking about in this class, right? And if you watch the social media channels video already, the videos, you'll have already seen some of the discussion that's in there about how companies can do really good things by taking part in memes that exist. Okay. So that's one campaign that I thought was kind of intriguing. Another one, let me turn that back on. Another comment I was going to make is that if you look at there was a lot of discussion about who won the Super Bowl, right, as always, and of course apparently the Kansas City Chiefs won the actual Super Bowl, but really what we mean is who won the marketing campaign, right? And one source that I turn to on a regular basis is Ad Meter. They've been doing this for a while, and their claim is that the number one ad was the Groundhog Day campaign, which Jeep ran, which is hilarious. And by the way, you can go to this, if you just type in USA Today Ad Meter 2020 Super Bowl, you'll get to this page quickly, and it's links to all of them. And the Groundhog Day one, I think, really ties into nostalgia, which is like a big theme that has been kind of working well for ad companies in the last year or so. So that's great. It's obviously the Super Bowl was held actually on Groundhog Day this year, so that helped as well. Bill Murray's kind of funny in general, and it has an animal, so it kind of clicks a bunch of the boxes that you normally think of as being for good commercials. I like the fact that, so it's an ad for the Jeep Rubicon, right? And I like the fact that it's fairly prominent. The Rubicon is featured quite well, but it's not dominating it, right? Like, really the thing is about Groundhog Day, right? So it kind of provides a nice balance right there, and I can see why it did pretty well. And then number two was the Snot Pock ad from Hyundai, right, which is the kind of Boston ad that kind of has them all talking about whether or not a car can talk, right? And of course, playing off the Boston accent in a lot of different ways. I'm not sure that one for me worked as well because it wasn't as clear to me in the end that it was a Hyundai ad. Like it could have been any car with that capability. So I'm not sure if that part of it really worked. But whereas the Jeep Rubicon run, it's really obvious as a Jeep, right? Like there are very few other cars that have that look and feel to them, so it's kind of a little bit different. And then number three was the Google ad that a lot of people have been talking about quite a bit. It's the one where it's an old man talking about his wife, who at least you assume for some reason maybe has passed away, and he's just remembering all the things about her, and it was really touching and sentimental in many respects, right? And so it seemed to have done pretty well. I heard one comment in my offline class that in a room of like 40 people, when this ad came on, everyone kind of got quiet. So that's kind of intriguing. And then rounding up the top five, the Doritos ad, the Cool Ranch ad, which featured Lil Nas X, did pretty well. And then Rocket Mortgage had this Aquaman ad that was kind of interesting. Though a friend of mine and I were discussing this ad today, another one professor in the marketing department, and we can't figure out why this has anything to do with Rocket Mortgage. But that except for maybe you're comfortable, right? Like that's the idea with Rocket Mortgage. It seemed like a string. Anyways, with regards to digital marketing, usually we can't really tell how effective each of these was the day after, but it'll be interesting to see what happens as the days go on to any of these. The real question, I think, is can they tie these ads into some longer running campaign, either on social media or in other digital forms? It is true. We do know from research that you remember Super Bowl ads longer than other ads, and maybe because of the motion, maybe because people put more effort into them. We don't know why, but they still don't last super long, right? And so that you really need, in order to really gain the investment you need out of it, you really need to tie it into a longer running ad. And so that brings up a question actually that's interesting, which is that let me bring this last comment up. So the AMA sends out a little breakdown every year right after the American Marketing Association, immediately after the Super Bowl. I just gotta find this. Here it is. Okay, about what about the Super Bowl results in terms of marketing. Show this up. So here you can see. So Super Bowl 54. So the estimated spending by consumers was $17.2 billion. In other words, because of the Super Bowl, it's expected that people will spend $17.2 billion additional dollars. Or the average expected, that breaks down to an average expected spending per person of $88.65, right? The top ad categories, and this shouldn't be too much surprise given what we just talked about, were auto manufacturers, media entertainment, and food, non-candy related. The cost for a 30-second spot was on average $5.6 million, right? That's the highest ever, which every year it is, right? Every year it gets higher. By the numbers, right, there were, so for last year, right, this is for last year. We know what the numbers were, right? That's interesting. They're giving me the numbers for last year. I just realized that. 50. Some of their numbers seem way off on this. Okay. AMA usually does a good job, but this infographic seems a little bit off. I think this is supposed to be for this year. I think this is supposed to be for Fox. I'll double check that, right? But essentially, right, there were 54 advertisers, 93 spots. 60 of those were brand spots, and 33 were show promos. So those are, Fox or CBS or whoever's got the Super Bowl that year uses this as a time to promote their own shows. The revenue for CBS or Fox, I believe it was actually, was almost 400 million. There were almost an hour's worth of ads. There were 1.5 million social interactions, and 3.4 billion people were reached on social, which is about half the planet was reached in some way because of the Super Bowl. The audience of the Super Bowl was 98.2 million, and about 67% of U.S. homes were reached. Right, so that's pretty fantastic numbers, right? So I just kind of want to give you an idea of how much impact the Super Bowl actually has. Okay. Not that you need to be made aware of that again, but it always helps to kind of break down these numbers. Okay, the final thing I want to talk about today. Let me pull up, see if there's any. Okay, again, if you have any questions, feel free to post them. Final thing I want to talk about today is the Facebook followers reading. So, the follower factor. Let me get my notes up so you can see them. Okay. So I thought this article was really interesting. It's a couple years old now, but it's still pretty true, right? I mean, many of the things it's talking about are still true. One thing I'm kind of curious about is after reading this, it becomes very aware that there's a lot of fake followers and fake content out there on social media. And if you weren't aware of that by now, you should be after having read this article, right? But one thing I always find interesting, and let me pull this up real quick, I'll just show you how easy this is to do, is that apparently I crashed for a little bit there, so I apologize for that. Hopefully it wasn't too long. I'll edit this out after it's up. Oh, looks like I'm back up. Okay, good. So what I was trying to say before my stream crash is that it's fairly easy to buy this kind of content, right? This is a picture from Fiverr.com from a while ago, right, where they were where you were able to kind of purchase sharing your paranormal or UFO content or promoting 100,000 followers, etc., for anywhere from $5 to $30, right? Give you an example of what it looks like today. And if I pull this up, a split second while I pull this up, and hopefully it won't crash if I'm doing this again. No. Hold on one second. Yeah, okay. So this is kind of what it looks like today, right? It's a little bit, it's not quite as easy. Some of the content shifted a little bit, right? But you still say, I will promote website promotion to 100 million worldwide social media. I'll promote anything for real social media owners. People doing, I will do massive Apple iTunes. I will design and attract. Some of it's more legitimate, right? I will design an attracting poster for social media promotion. That's, at least that's not buying like straight up followers or promotion, right? Do 100-word articles, right, et cetera, et cetera. So it's become a little bit harder to just quote unquote straight up buy followers, and maybe it's partially because of the crackdown that's happened, partially as a result of this follower factory, right, episode. But it's still possible. That's kind of what I wanted to get at, right? And so it still exists out there, and you can definitely find these services out there. And I don't think a lot of people are aware of that, right? They're not aware that just how easy it is to just quickly generate a page by purchasing followers, right? And so, part of the question then becomes, how does that number of followers influence decisions, right? Well, the more followers someone has, the more likely that anyone will make a purchase decision, obviously, right? Because of the fact that it shows credibility in that firm or that brand. As a result, advertisers pay influencers with more followers, right? Because let's imagine this, right? Let's imagine that there's a 1% chance any Twitter follower is going to purchase my product, right? Well, then I want to have as many Twitter followers as I can have, right? But in reality, that 1% is a number that relates to real followers, right? It's not actually related to purchase followers, because purchase followers tend to not be real people. And so if I'm purchasing followers, right, then that 1% number goes down quite a bit, right? And so in reality, it's actually not to my benefit to purchase a lot of fake followers. Now, you could argue there is still some benefit, right, because it adds additional credibility to the firm to have more followers, right? And so that's the only way in which it really benefits you, but it actually decreases your return on investment to some extent, because now any content you put out there on social media isn't seen by as many real people as before, right? At least some fake people. So there's a big concern from a marketer perspective that paying for followers that are not legitimate just will will decrease your overall return on investment in social media content. Another concern is that if you're partnering with an influential and their fake followers are discovered, that could tarnish your brand reputation to some extent, right? Um, in addition, right, um, that kind of brings into the idea of verified accounts. And there's some people who have pushed that all accounts on social media are verified, right? And if that was the case, then everyone is now accountable. Fake accounts become harder to create, right? But to some extent, it may destroy some of the ability to have free speech without repercussions, right? So it kind of has a negative effect on your overall ability, on some of the positive aspects of social media. And the picture I'm showing you here is just kind of interesting. This is a picture of um, actually a service. I think this one's in the Philippines, where they essentially manage these large-scale fake accounts. And they used to try and do things like use virtual servers and things like that. But Facebook and Twitter and all these accounts, they got better and better at detecting that you were doing that. And so in the end, what they've wound up doing is actually literally just buying hundreds of Androids, for instance, and hooking them up in a row and having someone come by and push the buttons manually on each machine, because it's hard to detect that that's actually a fake service, right? Let's see, we already talked about that. Oops, sorry, I went the wrong way. So, it's interesting to think about what the pros and cons of verified accounts are from each of these perspectives, from marketers, influentials, and consumers. Consumers, right, let's start there, right? The pros are that now that anyone you see on social media is a real person to some extent, right, or at least can pass the verification test. The con is that, let's say you want to open a social media account that tries to disclose whistleblower type information, right? That becomes a lot harder to do, right, under a verified account system. For influentials, right, the pro is that you can become verified, hopefully, right, and that gains you a certain status, and you don't have to worry about any kind of fake influencers or being debunked in some sort of purchase scheme. But the con is that it becomes much harder to accumulate that influence over time. And for marketers, right, they play the fake follower game to a large extent because it's useful to them to show off those numbers and to kind of present that they have a lot of influence, right? And they can use that to buy credibility for social media in the rest of their firm, because often they're fighting within their firm for budget, right? So there's a lot of pros and cons to the situation, but the con for marketers obviously is that they get discovered doing this. There's a huge impact, as we've discussed already. Right? Let's see what you had to say about this. So let me flip the camera back around and pull up the notes I have for your content. Okay, there we go. Okay, so. So we had a couple of different people who kind of wrote some interesting thoughts, right? So Chris Kevler walked in to wrote and says that I do feel marketers should be concerned with partnering with influencers that may have bought followers. I would go as far as say that marketers should be concerned with purchase or fake followers in general. These accounts are creating invalid data to throw off their analytics, much like the discussion we just had about how it decreases your return on investment. A lot of digital marketing decisions are made off the analytics, and they're just kind of wrong when they have these fake followers, is basically what he's saying, right? Marketers need to, if social media sites don't want to remove these because they have an incentive to keep all those numbers high, then they should start building models that take that into account. And I think that's a positive point, right? J. Michael Sutton said, when we're talking about should marketers be worried about partnering with influencers who've bought followers, he said as of now, no. Marketers should use any tools available to them. It's not much different than using SEO tricks to get your brand to the top of the list. And that's true a lot, right? Like people do things like, try and push a bunch of sentence and keyword phrases into a web page to get their listing higher, right? Your goal is to get your product in the hand of someone that will promote your brand, right? You don't want to use the wrong kind of influencer that will generate backlash. So you do need to be careful about who you're researching, who you're working with. Should social media companies move to a policy where all accounts must be verified? J. Michael says, sure, yes. And Twitter has made it clear its lack of desire to clean up their job. We should push them to do so. And he mentions that there's similar concerns of China and TikTok, for instance, gathering data. I don't know if that necessarily has to do with fake accounts or anything like that, but there's definitely are some interest, and the government is taking a look into TikTok, and the U.S. federal government for that reason. Pratik Chatterjee was talking about should social companies move to a policy where accounts be verified. Sorry, and he says social media companies are currently reactive in this policy, not proactive. Right? They kind of they identify identity theft, they make a decision about it, and they move forward. They don't really have a way to kind of do this proactively. And it's funny because we do have this technology, right? Like Airbnb and Uber and several others have technologies to verify accounts pretty easily, right? And so why haven't these companies moved toward that space? It's very interesting why they haven't. And I mean, part of the answer is because it's to their advantage not to, right? They need the high daily average user counts and things like that in order to continue to get the revenue they're getting. Lane Comfort says a marketer should absolutely be worried about partnering with influencers who have bought followers. It appears to be against the terms of service of many social networks. True. So that's interesting because Twitter will say you can't do this, you can't do these things, but then they look the other way when people actually do it. Secondly, purchase followers don't truly increase engagement. Yeah, exactly. At this time, I don't envision a future where social media companies force all accounts to be verified. Too many of these systems are focused on the size of their user base. Great comment, yeah. Daniel Atwood says, the existence of fake followers creates a real problem for marketers that should be taken seriously. Marketers make their partnership decisions in large part based on the number of followers and amount of reach that that person has. However, the marketer will never receive the desired return on investment because a lot of those followers are fake. Right? And that's true, right? Like the true measure of influence isn't the number of followers you have; it's the number of people that you've actually influenced to take an action. You can influence to take an action, and if a lot of those people are fake, you can't influence them to take an action. Social media companies exist somewhere in between marketers and consumers, and have some competing requirements, conflicts of interest. So it's very unlikely that it goes on to say basically it's going to be difficult for them to start verifying everything. The case of Jessica Reichley in the New York Times article provides some real examples of social media activity that can damage an individual's reputation. Maybe if these continue, one thing that I can kind of extrapolate from them is maybe if these things continue to happen, then we'll see some action from the point of view of the social media companies. So that's the major topics I was planning to cover for today. I hope that was kind of an interesting discussion of the Super Bowl, of the follower activities. If you have your favorite Super Bowl campaign that you want me to take a look at, feel free to send me an email along those lines, right? I always love seeing what people thought was interesting or relevant. The other thing I was going to say, I don't think I mentioned the Superb Owls. Partially I was shown that because Michelle Moore, who found that and sent it to me. So thanks, Michelle, for sending that. Much along those lines, right? It made me dig into where Superb Owls comes from, and everything with that was kind of interesting. Apparently, the actual term goes back to like 2008 at least, right? That's the first time it appeared online, but it's been gaining popularity recently. So thanks everyone for sticking around for today. Again, if you want to know what to do for the rest of this week, make sure you turn in your project introduction and team contract. Make sure you watch the week 5 videos. Make sure you complete the individual conceptual assignments. That will be available on February 5th and due on February 12th. And make sure you read chapters 3 and 20 to 21. That's it for today, let's see if there's any questions that come in at the last moment. There haven't. But I look forward to talking to you next week. Take care, everybody.